Welcome to the first chapter of Joy's love story, where I'm going to talk about how my love and I met for the first time, or at least what we thought was the first time. This started at the same time my depression had began moving into another severe period that had forced me to quit working. About that same time, I had gone to visit my cousin and her family for Thanksgiving holidays, and her husband had been pestering me for a good year or so to give this online game called World of Warcraft a try. He knew that I enjoy playing computer games, especially RPG, role playing based games. So he figured I'd really love this online role playing game where you get to play with, well, the massive number of other players, was something that he was already playing himself, and he thought it would be really fun to have a family member to play with on occasion. I had always been resistant to it because of my anxiety for the most part. Social interactions would always make me uncomfortable, and being in an online game environment, especially where the majority of players are significantly younger than I am, not to mention the typical young misogynistic male, didn't really thrill me. But during that Thanksgiving visit, he finally got me to sit down at his computer and he logged into his account and he had me go ahead and create a character to mess around with to get a feel for the game. It was like, okay, yeah, this feels like a lot of the other role playing games I've played on my computer. I wasn't too certain how it would work out, though. Most of the role playing games I had were the type where your character has a single life. You create save points, and if your character dies, well, you just go back to your most recent save point or whichever one you wanted to, start playing it over again from there. Whereas in this online environment, that doesn't really work out too well because it's a persistent world. So I was somewhat intrigued by the more mechanical aspects of how would this work for a massively multiplayer online game. As my depression continued to worsen and I finally had to quit working, I finally decided, you know what? I need to be doing something with my time that will take my mind off the depression. So I went ahead, I bought myself my own copy of the game and started playing it. It went better than I kind of hoped. I did start, of course, making friends as I would progress through the world, and you'd find other players doing the same quest with you. And so you'd just group up to work together to get the quest done easier. Or then you would progress through the story enough where all of a sudden you need to be doing a dungeon. The game had its mechanics for players to find ways to find other players who also need to be doing the same dungeon. And I started making friends that way. I think the first player friend I ever made was someone who had joined into the same dungeon group that I was part of, and it it was going badly. For those of you that have been playing classic WoW in recent years or can remember the old days, this was good old-fashioned Gnomeregan. It was probably the first real big difficulty spike in a dungeon for new players because of just the immense size of the place. Different types of mobs that were starting to show real MMORPG gaming mechanics. It didn't take long for the other players in the group to decide, nope, they've had enough of this place. They want it out. But this other player and I were like, you know, we're kind of having fun. Let's see how far we can get through this place, just the two of us. And it's, you know, it's the sort of things that memories are made out of. So there was my first gaming friend. And I made a few other gaming friends along the way. And it just became natural that if we were all online at the same time, we would be playing together. Eventually, we all had leveled up our characters and hit max level. And in my case, again, majority of players are young males. So these friends of mine were all young males. They were at least cool ones. They weren't misogynistic or anything like that. I don't can't remember at what point I let them know that yes, I am a girl in real life, as opposed to what girls normally were when you're in the gaming environment, which is guys in real life. They were very PvP focused, player versus player. Player versus player just doesn't suit my personal nature. I am probably too much of an empath for that sort of mindless carnage just for the sake of killing other players for it to really click with me. While I would still, you know, continue to play with them in the PvE or player versus environment content, and I would occasionally join them for some of their PvP content, I started branching out looking for more friends that were more interested in the parts of the game that I really enjoyed. One of the things that I wanted to do is to try to start experience raiding. Raiding being where you'd have a large group of players together in a instance environment that's separate from the main game world, and you just progress your way through it, trying to kill off all the big bads in there. I managed to just make some friends, mostly because at that point, the character I considered my main character that I wanted to play the most was a holy priest, which has the job of healing the other players in combat. Finding people willing to play the healer role when you are in a gaming environment filled with young males who are out to destroy things could be difficult at times. So healers were always very popular, very much in demand. It was generally very easy for me to find a group to join. And one of these groups became a regular thing for me, especially when I displayed a willingness to heal what was at the time one of the harder dungeons in the game. And so I'd get together with this group of 3 others. Generally, they would find one of their friends that would fill out the group for us, and we would just run several dungeons in sequence together. What I didn't know is that most of the others in the group were actually dedicated raiders and some of the better performing guilds on our server. Of course, while I was really nowhere near close to their level of playing skill, they directed me toward others that were at a similar skill level to me and were trying to start a new raid guild of their own to start going through content. That group lasted from the end of the Burning Crusade expansion to the addition of the final raid in Wrath of the Lich King, Icecrown Citadel, when unfortunately one of the raid members, who was a real life friend of the guildmaster, displayed his completely misogynistic side. When we started struggling on one of the bosses in Icecrown Citadel, he went on a rage blaming the healers in the group, myself being one of them. There were 2 others, for why he kept dying on this particular encounter when it was none of our faults. At that point, I was experienced no with raiding. I knew how to do combat logging and analysis and all of that. And I could go back through the combat logging and see clearly he was dying because he was not using his defensive cooldowns at the correct time. I try to point that out, and no, he's just going on and ranting and raving about how girls shouldn't play video games and how we all suck and we didn't know how to heal. I was like, considering how long we had been playing together at that point, which was pretty close to 2 years. Actually, it might have even been a little bit more than 2 years. We're just like, "Yep, nope, not having this. We're gone. Bye." All 3 of us healers, we went ahead and left the guild. So that left me a free agent, and again, as a healer. Just like with dungeons, people who wanted to raid were frequently in need of healers because that was a role that was not overly popular. It was seen as dull and boring because you weren't pushing out the big numbers killing things. And so I started getting invited into other groups randomly, including groups that frequently contained players from the top Alliance guild on the server that I was playing on. And so I was, just simply there having fun, helping out, having a good time. It wasn't really, I enjoyed the raiding. I I never considered myself hardcore when it came to raiding. Although certainly later on, I basically ended up in that kind of position, and I'll talk about that more in the next episode. I found myself being invited into that guild just as a friend. I wasn't considered a raider. I was what was referred to as friends and family when some of their core raiders were unable to make it and they just needed to fill the spot to hit the 25 men that they needed for doing the raid that night. Sometimes I would end up being invited into the group, although at this point I wasn't being invited in on one of my healers. They had no problems with their healers. I was being invited in on my hunter. The raid leader, his character's name was Priestian. Everybody called him Priesty. Just really chill guy. To me, it was fairly apparent that he had to be a little bit older than most of the others that we were playing with at the time, because he did not have that late teenage, young adult attitude about him. He was very focused. He was very calm. When problems occurred in the raid, he didn't go into any sort of ranting rage and yelling and screaming at people. Instead, he simply pointed out, this is what's wrong. Let's fix it so we can kill the boss and move on. Just 100% leader material. Never had a doubt about that. And to this day, in all honesty, I would call him the best raid leader I ever played with. That's how we met. Priesty is the friend I've been talking about all of this time. Although, of course, at that point, we weren't friends. It was simply he was the raid leader. I was the sometimes substitute when they were short bodies. So, doing a lot of raiding with them at this point. Also, my emotional wellness was deteriorating as the depression was continuing to get more and more severe. And by this point, my parents had already assumed financial control over my life, and they had started the gaslighting and the other emotional manipulation, all of which kind of spilled over into game for me, because there are times where dealing with certain people, this one other particular, actually, no, scratch that. It wasn't one. There were actually a couple of people involved, but this one particular female, and definitely female player, would just make me reactive to the crap they did. I had never really hidden the fact that I suffered from depression. I didn't, try to make an issue out of it, pulling it up all the time, but I didn't try to hide it either. If for some reason it was relevant to whatever discussion was going on. This particular female and another individual in the guild who did not turn out to be the person they claimed they were. It was someone who just loved creating drama. Just decided to start messing with me, put focus on me. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but basically, I was out of the guild eventually. It was not a place I could tolerate being in it anymore. And others were finding the whole situation that they were witnessing uncomfortable as well. And so it's like, okay, get rid of the victim. Let's do some victim blaming. If you remove the victim, then everything else turns out perfectly fine. And of course, people forget that the next time that those that are the instigators start pulling their bullshit on a new person, but so it goes. But anyway, so I am no longer in this guild. I do find another guild to play with. And a lot of times I'm not even playing with a guild. I'm playing with random people who were looking in the game's public chat channels for more people to join their raid group so they could do their raiding. Another person that had also left the guild by this time was Priesty. He had left for other reasons. Even though the guild was the top performing alliance guild on the server, in the greater scheme of things, it was not one of the best guilds within the American region in general. Priesty was one of those players that had that level of skill, and he wanted to be able to push himself to see just how far he could get his progression going. And he wasn't by any means the only one that felt that way that had been in the guild. There were some others that left at the same time he did. I'm not really thinking anything about him because, again, the relationship between us was he was raid leader. I was just that sometimes substitute person. It was other people in the guild that I had been friends with that had brought me into the guild. Sometime later, after he had taken his main character to another server to join a much better guild, and I was in this other new guild, and I would just be playing, going through my regular routines, and Priesty would get on one of the characters that he had left behind on our server and send me a private message. Say, "You still crazy, Joy?" Or words to that effect. I can't remember the exact words anymore. I was just done having to deal with the drama that ended up generated in that guild, and so I just ignored it, would ignore the message, wouldn't respond to it at all, go about my day. Sometime later, a week or a couple weeks or a month, he'd do it again. Private message coming to me. "So you still crazy, Joy?" I was just kind of disappointed that this one player who seemed so much more mature, so much more intelligent, so much more capable than most of the other players out there would end up acting so childish to send these messages to me, mocking me. Finally, one day after he had sent these messages a couple more times, I just said, "Please just leave me alone." I wasn't interested in having my buttons pushed or having some drama addicted player pushing my buttons for their amusement. I just made a simple response: "Please just leave me alone." And he did leave me alone for a little while, but then he contacted me again, this time to apologize, to say that he, accepted that what he was doing was not polite and he would not do it anymore. It was like, okay, maybe, you know, maybe he was just going through a rough time of his own or something. Maybe that's what had caused him to send those messages. Because, by this time in my life, I had learned about forgiveness. I had come to understand that sometimes good people do dumb, stupid things just because they're going through their own hard times. I accepted the apology and left it at that. A few weeks after that, he messages me again out of the blue, asking me if I wanted to run some content with him, which I thought was strange. I mean, again, we had no real actual relationship with each other beyond raid leader, sometimes substitute. But I'm like, well, he did apologize and maybe it's a change. And sure, why not? When he'd been raid leading, he had seemed very much like a person that I would enjoy having as a friend. Let's see what happens. I accepted and we started playing through content together on occasion when he had time to be playing on his alts on our server, and our friendship started. Simple as that. It's time to end this video. Wait until I am prepared to record the next one that will go into a description about our friendship and some of the things we did together and talked about. Until then, peace, love, and joy to all of you. Take care.